The cameras were already in position the moment I stepped onto the driveway. Flash after flash went off, sharp and relentless, slicing through the quiet morning like my pain was part of a schedule. Microphones tracked every step as I walked down the stone stairs of the house I had lived in for 12 years. The same house that used to feel permanent. The same place that no longer belonged to me. That house had hosted charity dinners, holiday parties, and smiling conversations with people who stopped answering my calls the second my marriage ended. 2 suitcases sat beside me. That was it. That was my entire life. Movement caught my eye upstairs. Through the tall bay window I saw him. My husband, no, my ex-husband. He stood on the second floor with his arm wrapped around another woman's waist, completely relaxed, like this was just another morning. She was younger, effortlessly confident, wearing the silk robe I used to wear on slow mornings when I still believed my marriage meant something. A voice broke through the noise. "Sophia, over here." Another followed, sharper, almost eager. "How does it feel to lose everything?" I did not respond. I physically could not. My throat felt scraped raw from crying all night, and I knew if I tried to speak, something ugly and uncontrollable would come out. So I gripped the handle of my suitcase and kept moving. My hands were shaking hard enough that I almost dropped it. "Sources say your husband's legal team wiped you out in court. Sophia, did you sign a prenup? Is it true you are homeless now?" That last question hit differently. Homeless? Not yet, I wanted to say. I had booked a cheap motel room for 1 week. 7 nights. After that I had no plan. My credit cards were frozen. My accounts were locked. My phone was full of messages I sent to people who used to call me family, and never replied. I stopped and looked back one last time. He was still watching. Coffee mug in hand. Calm. Comfortable. The woman beside him laughed softly, her hand resting on his chest like she belonged there. Something inside me fractured in a way that felt permanent, like a line had been crossed that could never be erased. The car door opened. I slid inside. The driver said nothing. He did not have to. My name had been everywhere all week. Fallen socialite. Disgraced wife. Woman left with nothing but luggage and headlines. As the car pulled away, the house vanished from view. I did not know where I would sleep the following week. I did not know how I would survive the month. What I did not know, what no one saw coming, was this. Someone had been watching everything. And what happened next would decide whether I disappeared completely or walked back into a life that would shock everyone who thought I was finished. Before everything collapsed, I thought I understood who I was. I was the woman people described as lucky. The kind who had stability, security, and a life that looked solid from the outside. I believed consistency meant safety. I believed commitment meant protection. I believed that if you loved hard enough and showed up every day, things would not fall apart. That belief shaped everything I did. I built my identity around being dependable, polished, put together. I was the woman who remembered birthdays, hosted dinners, and kept conversations smooth even when things felt tense underneath. I told myself that peace was created by effort, by compromise, by staying calm when something felt off. Love to me meant endurance. It meant staying when it would have been easier to walk away. It meant choosing stability over questions. I believed that marriage was a shield. That once you were chosen, once you were committed, you were safe from the kind of chaos that happens to other people. I thought I had done everything right. I gave up pieces of myself slowly, the way people do when they tell themselves it is temporary. I adjusted my expectations. I softened my boundaries. I convinced myself that wanting less attention, less warmth, less honesty was part of being mature. I mistook silence for peace. I thought safety was a shared bank account, a familiar house, a last name that opened doors. I thought love was proven through consistency, not care. Through routine, not reassurance. There were moments, small ones, when doubt surfaced. Late nights that felt lonely even when someone was sleeping beside me. Conversations that ended before they really began. A quiet sense that I was shrinking to keep things steady. I ignored those moments. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself this was what adulthood looked like. I believed that real love was calm, even when it felt empty. I believed that being chosen once meant you would always be chosen. That belief kept me grounded. It also kept me blind, because the version of me before everything fell apart did not understand this one truth. Safety built on silence is not safety at all. And I would not learn that lesson until the life I trusted stopped protecting me. Without warning. From the outside, our relationship looks solid. People used words like goals and perfect timing. They saw the house, the dinners, the photos that always looked effortless. They assumed stability meant happiness. I let them believe it because part of me believed it too. We moved through life like a well-rehearsed routine. Morning coffee. Predictable schedules. Social events planned weeks in advance. Everything looked calm, controlled, and adult. There was comfort in that rhythm, and I clung to it harder than I realized. What I did not notice at first was how quiet my own voice had become. Decisions started happening without discussion. Plans shifted and I adjusted. Preferences became suggestions. I told myself this was compromise, that relationships required flexibility. I framed it as maturity. I framed it as love. Affection became inconsistent, but never fully absent. Just enough warmth to keep me guessing. Just enough attention to remind me I was still chosen. When distance appeared, I blamed stress. When silence stretched, I filled it myself. I worked harder to keep things smooth. The imbalance was subtle, almost polite. He never demanded control outright. He simply occupied more space, more certainty, more authority. I responded by shrinking just enough to make things easier. Felt practical at the time. Felt safe. Slowly, my sense of security shifted away from myself. I measured my worth through harmony. Things were calm, I was doing something right. If tension appeared, I assumed I had missed something. I became hyper-aware of moods, tones, pauses. I learned how to prevent discomfort before it arrived. That was when emotional dependence quietly settled in. I stopped asking myself what I wanted and focused on what worked. I delayed questions that felt inconvenient. I convinced myself that stability mattered more than depth, that certainty mattered more than honesty. There were moments when the illusion cracked. A look that lingered too long on someone else. A conversation that ended with dismissal instead of resolution. A feeling that I was maintaining something rather than sharing it. I noticed those moments. I also ignored them, because the relationship still looked perfect. And walking away from something that appeared stable felt reckless. It felt ungrateful. It felt like inviting chaos into a life I worked hard to keep orderly. So I stayed. What I did not understand then was this. An illusion does not break loudly. It holds together just long enough to convince you nothing is wrong. Until one day, it collapses without asking your permission. The first red flag did not arrive loudly. It showed up as a pause. A look that stayed a second too long. A conversation that ended before it actually began. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that felt serious enough to confront. Just small moments that left me slightly unsettled. I brushed them aside. Questions started to feel inconvenient. When I asked for clarity, the response felt dismissive, wrapped in calm words that made me doubt my timing instead of his intent. I learned to choose silence over discomfort. Felt easier. It felt low-key responsible. Another sign appeared in the way decisions shifted. Plans were made without me. Adjustments happened after the fact. I was informed, not included. When I hesitated, I was reminded that everything was under control, that I was worrying for no reason. I told myself trust meant letting go. That belief cost me more than I understood. Boundaries softened slowly, not all at once. A little here, a little there. I stopped insisting on explanations. I stopped pushing back. I told myself compromise was a strength, not a warning. Self-doubt crept in quietly. Whenever something felt off, I questioned my own instincts first. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Maybe this was what stable relationships looked like once the excitement faded. I told myself other people had it worse. Control never arrived as a command. Came as influence. Suggestions framed as logic. Preferences disguised as concern. I adjusted my behavior to keep things smooth. I monitored my reactions to avoid tension. I became careful with my words. Without realizing it, I was editing myself. Friends noticed before I did. Subtle comments. Light jokes about how quiet I had become. I laughed them off. I defended him without being asked. I defended the relationship because admitting doubt felt dangerous. That was another red flag. Moments of confidence were followed by withdrawal. Warmth appeared right after distance. Just enough reassurance to reset the balance. Just enough to keep me steady, not enough to make me secure. I mistook inconsistency for depth. Control does not always look harsh. Sometimes it looks reasonable. Sometimes it looks calm. Sometimes it feels like stability, until you realize you are the only one bending. By the time I noticed how much ground I had given up, it felt too late to reclaim it without risking everything. That realization stayed quiet for a while, and that silence would soon demand a price I was not prepared to pay. The truth did not arrive gently. It came wrapped in legal language, delivered with a calm tone that felt almost insulting given the damage it carried. Divorce papers were placed in front of me like a formality, as if 12 years could be reduced to a few clean pages and a signature line. No warning came first. No conversation. No attempt to explain. One day I was a wife. The next I was a problem being handled. The timing was deliberate. I realized that later. Accounts were frozen before I understood what was happening. Access disappeared overnight. Cards declined in places I had used for years. The safety I thought was permanent vanished without a sound. When I asked questions, answers came carefully filtered. Everything was framed as necessary, practical, efficient. I was told the lawyers would handle communication, that emotions only complicated things. That suggestion alone felt like a quiet dismissal of my humanity. Abandonment does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks organized. The humiliation arrived in layers. Private first. Conversations held without me. Decisions made on my behalf. A steady realization that I was no longer considered relevant in my own life. Then came the public version. The one I did not consent to. Stories appeared before I was ready. Headlines stripped context away. Words like fall and failure followed my name like facts instead of speculation. People watched from a distance, curious but detached, as if this was a cautionary tale instead of a real collapse. I learned quickly who enjoyed the spectacle. Messages stopped coming in. Invitations disappeared. Support turned into silence. I was expected to accept it quietly, with dignity, without disrupting the narrative that had already been written for me. The worst part was not the divorce itself. It was how disposable I suddenly felt. I replayed moments endlessly, searching for the point where everything shifted. The day affection cooled. The moment honesty stopped. The exact second I lost ground without realizing it. None of it offered clarity. Just questions that echoed longer each night. Public smiles replaced private explanations. He appeared untouched. Calm. Confident. Supported. I watched from a distance as he stepped easily into a future that seemed carefully prepared. That image did something to me that I still struggle to explain. It made the loss feel intentional. Humiliation settled into my body differently than sadness. It was heavier. Sharper. It followed me into rooms, into mirrors, into conversations I no longer felt welcome in. Divorce did not just end my marriage. It rewrote my position in the world. And standing there, watching everything I trusted rearrange itself without me, I understood something that changed the way I saw my past forever. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated exit. And I was the only one who had not been informed. The loss did not happen all at once. It arrived in confirmations, notifications, and quiet refusals that piled up faster than I could process them. A declined card at a grocery store. A frozen account message on my phone. Access denied to systems I had used without thinking for years. Each one landed like a reminder. I no longer had control. The legal defeat came first. Meetings filled with language that sounded neutral but carried permanent consequences. Terms were explained carefully, almost kindly, as if clarity could soften impact. I listened, nodded, and signed where I was told, still believing cooperation would protect me from further damage. It did not. By the time the paperwork was finalized, my name had been removed from more than just documents. It was erased from decisions, assets, and spaces I once managed with confidence. The house I called home became inaccessible overnight. Locks changed. Access codes updated. Familiar rooms turned unreachable without warning. That kind of loss does not feel dramatic. Feels disorienting. Money followed next. Not slowly. Completely. Accounts frozen pending review. Credit cards flagged. Automatic payments failing one by one. Services I did not think about suddenly unavailable. Independence stripped down to receipts and balances I could no longer see. I started doing mental math for things I never had to consider before. Gas, food, temporary shelter, time. Isolation settled in quietly after that. Phone stopped ringing. Messages went unanswered. People I had shown up for during their worst moments suddenly unavailable when I needed even a fraction of that support. Some avoided me. Others watched from a distance, unsure what to say, or unwilling to get involved. Silence filled the space where certainty used to live. I tried reaching out anyway. Not for money. Not for solutions. Just to feel grounded. Most conversations ended politely and quickly. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone assumed I would be fine. I stopped correcting them. Losing my identity hurt more than losing the house or the money. I did not know how to introduce myself anymore. I was no longer a wife. No longer part of a shared future. No longer anchored to the role that had defined my adult life. Without that structure, I felt unrecognizable to myself. I questioned everything. My judgment. My instincts. My worth. I wondered how easily something I believed was stable could dissolve so completely. I wondered how many parts of myself I had tied to things that were never guaranteed. Nights felt longer. Days blurred together. I avoided mirrors because I did not recognize the person staring back. She looked unsure. Unprotected. Stripped down to survival. What scared me most was not the uncertainty. It was how quickly the world adjusted to my absence. And in that quiet, isolated space with nothing left to rely on but myself, I realized I had crossed into a phase of my life I did not know how to navigate yet. One where everything familiar was gone, and nothing had replaced it. The motel sat just off the highway, far enough from the city to feel forgotten. The sign flickered even in daylight. The paint along the doors was chipped, the numbers uneven, like they had been replaced one at a time over the years. When I stepped inside my room, the smell hit first. Disinfectant layered over something older. Something tired. The room was small. One bed. One chair. A thin desk bolted to the wall. The bedspread had a burn mark near the corner, and the curtains did not fully close. I stood there longer than necessary, suitcase still in my hand, trying to understand how this had become my reality. This was not a stopover. This was survival. The first night passed without sleep. Every sound felt amplified. Footsteps outside. Doors slamming. A television blaring through the wall. My body stayed tense like rest was something I had to earn back. Morning did not bring relief. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at my phone, scrolling through contacts I no longer trusted myself to call. Every name carried history. Every option felt like a risk. I told myself I would reach out later. I told myself I just needed time. Time did not fix anything. Hunger became routine. I rationed what little cash I had left, choosing cheap meals that filled space without comfort. I ate slowly, counting bites, aware of how fragile everything felt. Even basic choices carried weight now. Showers became my only escape. Hot water gave me a few minutes where the world softened, where I could close my eyes and pretend I still belonged somewhere. When the water ran cold, reality returned immediately. Loneliness changed shape down there. It was not dramatic. It was quiet. A constant awareness that no one knew where I was and no one was looking. Messages I sent stayed unread. Calls went unanswered. The silence felt intentional even if it was not. I stopped expecting help. Emotional collapse did not look like tears every hour. It looked like numbness. Long stretches of staring at nothing. Forgetting what day it was. Losing track of time because nothing distinguished one moment from the next. I questioned myself relentlessly. How did I miss this? How did I allow my life to narrow down to this room? At what point did I stop protecting myself? Some nights, the weight pressed so hard on my chest that breathing felt deliberate. I lay awake replaying conversations, signs, moments I had explained away. None of them offered comfort. Only clarity that arrived too late. There was no safety net. Family had chosen distance. Friends had chosen silence. The version of me that people admired no longer existed, and with it went their interest. I learned how conditional belonging could be. The hardest part was realizing how invisible I had become. No one watched me now. No one asked questions. No one cared how I would get through the next week. I existed in a space where survival was private and failure was quiet. One afternoon, sitting on the edge of the bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror across from me. I barely recognized her. She looked thinner, tired, older in a way sleep could not fix. But there was something else there too. Something raw. Something stripped down to its core. That was the moment I understood I had reached the bottom. Not because I had nothing left, but because there was nothing left to lose. And I did not yet know that this was the exact point where everything was about to shift. The parking lot was almost empty that afternoon. Heat hovered over the asphalt, and the air felt heavy in a way that made it hard to think straight. I sat on the low concrete curb outside my room, phone in my hand, staring at a screen that offered no answers. I had been there for nearly an hour, debating whether to make one last call I knew would probably go unanswered. That was when a black car rolled in. It moved slowly, deliberately, nothing like the battered vehicles usually parked there. The engine cut off a few spaces away from me, and for a moment nothing happened. I assumed it would leave just as quietly. The driver's side door opened instead. A woman stepped out, mid-50s, composed, sharp posture. Everything about her looked out of place in that parking lot, from her tailored suit to the leather briefcase in her hand. She paused, scanning the area, then looked directly at me. Her gaze did not drift. She walked closer, heels steady against the pavement, and stopped a few feet away. Her expression was calm, professional, but careful, like she understood this moment mattered. "Are you Sophia?" she asked. The sound of my name landed differently. No one had said it like that in days. Not gently, not with intention. My first instinct was to stand up and walk away. My second was to freeze completely. I did not answer. She adjusted her grip on the briefcase, clearly aware of how exposed I probably looked. "I am not here to cause trouble," she said evenly. "I just need a moment of your time." That made my chest tighten. People did not look for me anymore. Not here. Not now. My mind ran through worst-case scenarios. Reporter. Process server. Another legal problem I could not afford to face. "I do not have money for a lawyer," I said flatly. "And I am not signing anything else." She shook her head once. "I am not here about your divorce." That stopped me. She introduced herself, offering credentials before I asked. "Attorney. Estate representative." Her words sounded unreal against the backdrop of cracked pavement and peeling paint. "I have been trying to locate you for several days," she continued. "You were difficult to find." That should have alarmed me more than it did. Instead, confusion took over. "Why?" I asked. She studied my face for a brief second, as if confirming something internally. Then she spoke again, lowering her voice slightly. "Because you were named in a legal matter that requires your immediate attention." My heart began to pound. Nothing about my life suggested that possibility made sense. I had nothing. No leverage. No assets. No standing. She glanced toward the motel door, then back at me. "We should talk somewhere quieter," she said. "This conversation will change things." I stayed seated, because something about the way she said my name told me this was not another loss waiting to happen. And because deep down I felt it. This interruption was not random. It was the first crack in a reality I thought was already sealed shut. We sat at a small cafe a few blocks away. It was quiet in the way places get during the afternoon lull, when no one is rushing and no one is listening. The woman set her briefcase on the table with care, like whatever was inside deserved respect. I wrapped my hands around a chipped mug of coffee I did not remember ordering, mostly to give them something to do. She did not rush. "I know this sounds unrealistic," she said calmly. "That is why I brought documentation." She opened the briefcase and slid a thin folder across the table. My name was on the front. Printed. Clean. Official. Something tightened in my chest. "I think you have the wrong person," I said, even as my fingers hovered over the edge of the folder. "That happens more than you think." "It does not," she replied. "Not like this." I opened it anyway. Inside were legal papers stamped and signed, dates, addresses, identification details I did not know by heart but recognized as mine. Everything looked precise, intentional, real in a way that made denial difficult. She waited until I looked up. You were named the sole beneficiary in an estate, she said. The assets were finalized last week. I stared at her, waiting for the clarification that would make this make sense. It did not come. Estate. I repeated. I do not have anyone. She gave me a name. It meant nothing at first. She explained patiently. A distant relative. Estranged. Private. Someone I had met only once as a child, if at all. Someone who lived quietly and deliberately, far from family drama and public attention. He passed away 2 weeks ago, she said. And he left everything to you. The word everything sat between us, heavy and undefined. How much? I asked, not because I believed her, but because I needed to hear the number to understand the scale of the mistake. She did not flinch. Approximately $60 million, she said. I laughed. It slipped out before I could stop it. Short, sharp, empty. The kind of laugh that comes from exhaustion, not humor. I shook my head, pushing the folder back toward her. That is not possible, I said. I barely knew him. He knew you, she replied quietly. She pointed to a page in the folder. Bank statements. Property listings. Asset summaries. Figures that made my vision blur if I stared too long. This is real, she said. Every part of it. My hand started shaking again. I flipped through the pages slowly, afraid that if I moved too fast, it would disappear. Nothing changed. The documents stayed where they were. Solid. Verified. Signed. Why me? I asked. She paused before answering. Because he was watching your life unfold, she said. And he believed you deserved something no one else gave you. The cafe felt too small suddenly. Minutes earlier, I had been calculating how long I could afford a motel room. Now I was staring at proof that my entire reality had just been challenged. I did not feel excited. I felt stunned. And underneath that shock was something far more dangerous. Hope. Hope did not last long. The woman closed the folder gently, as if she understood how fragile the moment was. She took a slow breath before speaking again. And that pause told me everything I needed to know. There is a condition, she said. Of course there was. Nothing like this ever comes without strings. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of her words settling in my chest. A few minutes earlier, $60 million had sounded unreal. Now it sounded dangerous. What kind of condition? I asked. She met my eyes directly. You are required to live in the primary residence of the estate for 6 months. I blinked. Live there? Yes, she said. Alone. That single word shifted something in the room. She explained carefully, step by step. I could not sell anything. I could not transfer ownership. I could not lease the property or allow anyone to move in. The house had to remain intact, untouched. Exactly as it was when the estate was finalized. And if I do not? I asked. She did not hesitate. The inheritance is revoked. My stomach dropped. There was a timeline. A clear deadline. 6 months starting the moment I accepted the terms. If I broke any rule even once, everything would be forfeited. Not reduced. Not renegotiated. Gone. I stared at the table, trying to process the shift. 6 months sounded manageable on paper. But nothing about my life felt stable enough to trust that assumption. I had just come from a motel room where sleep felt unsafe. The idea of isolation, of being alone in a house I had never seen, unsettled me more than I expected. There is more, she added. I looked up. This condition is not only about residency, she said. It is about restraint. She explained that the estate was structured intentionally. The benefactor believed wealth revealed character, not comfort. The house was not just a property. It was part of the test. People would notice. People would come looking. Pressure would follow. The 6 months were designed to measure one thing. Boundaries. If you hold your ground, she said, the estate becomes yours in full. And if I do not? I asked quietly. She folded her hands on the table. Then the assets are redirected to charity. The room felt tight again. This was not a gift. It was a challenge. I thought about the motel. The silence. The way no one had shown up when I disappeared. I thought about how easily people assumed I would bend when things became uncomfortable. She slid the folder back toward me. You do not have to decide today, she said. But once you do, the clock starts. I looked down at my name on the cover. For the first time since everything fell apart, the choice was entirely mine. And I had no idea yet how many people were about to test that decision. The iron gates opened without a sound. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if the house wanted time to study me before letting me pass. Tall trees lined the driveway, their branches reaching toward each other overhead, blocking out most of the afternoon light. By the time the car stopped, the air felt cooler, heavier. The mansion stood back from the street, untouched by noise or urgency. 4 stories of dark brick and stone. Tall windows that reflected the sky but revealed nothing inside. The kind of place designed to last longer than the people who lived in it. I stepped out of the car and stood there, suitcase in hand, unsure whether to move forward. This did not feel like rescue. It felt like an evaluation. The front door was massive, solid wood with a weight that required intention to open. When it finally gave way, the sound echoed through the entry hall, low and deep like a warning. The smell inside was unmistakable. Old wood. Closed rooms. Time. Light filtered in through tall windows, catching on a chandelier that hung perfectly still. The floor beneath my feet was marble, cold even through my shoes. White sheets covered the furniture, draped carefully, as if someone expected to return. No one had lived here recently, but nothing felt abandoned. My footsteps echoed as I moved deeper into the house. Every sound felt amplified, like the space was listening. Rooms opened into other rooms, each larger than the last. A formal dining room that could seat more people than I trusted. A library lined with books I had never touched. A staircase that curved upward with quiet authority. The house did not feel welcoming. It felt watchful. I walked slowly, taking it in piece by piece. The kitchen was pristine and used, every surface polished but untouched. The windows overlooked a garden that had been maintained without affection, trimmed but unloved. Order without warmth. Upstairs, the bedrooms felt frozen in time. Closets filled with clothing from decades past. Shoes arranged neatly. Personal items left exactly where they were last placed. I avoided mirrors, not ready to see myself framed by a life that was not mine. The master bedroom sat at the end of the hall. The bed was large, perfectly made, the windows offering a clear view of the city skyline in the distance. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the mattress, suddenly aware of how quiet everything was. The silence pressed in. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that asks questions. Why this house? Why this isolation? Why me? As I stood, something caught my eye across the room. A desk near the window. An envelope placed carefully at its center. My name was written on the front. That was when I realized the house was not just a setting. It was part of the test. And whatever waited inside that envelope was about to change how I understood everything that led me here. The envelope felt heavier than it looked. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind chosen by someone who believed words deserved weight. My name was written across the front in clean, deliberate handwriting. Not rushed. Not casual. Intentional. I stood there for a long moment before opening it. The house was silent around me. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing. When I finally broke the seal, the sound felt louder than it should have. Inside was a single letter. No legal language. No instructions. Just words. Sophia, it began. That alone made my chest tighten. You do not know me well, but I have known you for most of your life. I read that line twice. He wrote about watching from a distance. About paying attention quietly without interference. About noticing how I carried myself, how I adapted. How I endured situations that would have hardened other people. He did not frame it as pity. He framed it as recognition. I saw you choose grace when no one was watching, the letter continued. I saw you give loyalty to people who did not earn it. I saw you stay longer than you should have, because you believed love meant patience. My hand started to tremble. He acknowledged the marriage, the divorce, the silence that followed. Not in detail, but with an understanding that felt unsettlingly precise. He did not excuse what happened to me. He did not soften it. He named it. You were not protected, he wrote. You were tolerated. There is a difference. That sentence landed hard. He explained the house, the condition, the time requirement, not as punishment but as preparation. He believed comfort came too easily to people who never learned boundaries. He believed strength revealed itself under pressure, not rescue. This inheritance is not meant to save you, the letter said. It is meant to show you who you are when no one can reach you. I sank onto the edge of the desk chair, the room spinning slightly. He warned me gently that people would come, that they would question my right to this life, that they would test my resolve the moment they realized I would not bend. You will be tempted to explain yourself, he wrote. Do not. Your silence will teach them more than any argument. The letter ended simply. You have already survived worse than this. Now I want to see what you build when survival is no longer the goal. I folded the letter carefully, pressing it flat with my palm. For the first time since I entered the mansion, I did not feel alone. I felt seen. And I understood that this was not just an inheritance. It was an invitation to become someone I had not been allowed to be before. The doorbell rang on the 8th day. The sound cut through the house sharply, out of place in the silence I had grown used to. I stood still for a moment, listening, my body reacting before my mind caught up. No one was supposed to know where I was. That had been made very clear. I approached the door slowly. Through the glass I saw my sister. She stood on the front steps like she belonged there. Hair styled perfectly. Coat pressed. The kind of calm that comes from comfort, not concern. She smiled the moment she saw me, her expression softening instantly. Sophia, she said, opening her arms. I was so worried about you. Her hug came quickly, tightly, before I had time to respond. She smelled familiar. Expensive perfume. Memory. Guilt followed close behind. I tried calling, she continued, pulling back just enough to look at me. When I heard about the house, about the inheritance, I could not stay away. That word landed wrong. Inheritance. I stepped aside to let her in. She moved through the foyer slowly, eyes lifting toward the chandelier, fingers brushing the banister as if testing its value. Her concern faded with every step forward, replaced by interest she did not bother hiding. This place is incredible, she said. I had no idea. You were never supposed to, I replied. She laughed lightly, waving it off. Come on. Family is family. We look out for each other. The conversation stayed gentle at first. Apologies delivered without specifics. Regret expressed without accountability. She talked about being scared, about not knowing how to help when everything collapsed. Her words sounded practiced. Then the questions started. What are you planning to do with all this? Are you staying here long term? Have you talked to a financial advisor yet? Each one came wrapped in concern, but none were about me. I reminded her of the condition. 6 months. Alone. No exceptions. Her smile faltered for half a second. That seems extreme, she said carefully. You should not be by yourself right now. This kind of pressure can break people. I am managing, I replied. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. You do not have to do this alone. I could stay for a bit. Help you settle in. Make sure you are safe. There it was. The offer disguised as support. I cannot, I said. That would violate the terms. Her expression tightened, warmth cooling into something more deliberate. She stood, smoothing her coat, resetting her composure. Well, she said, if you change your mind, you know how to reach me. She did not hug me goodbye. 2 days later, my father arrived. He brought a bottle of expensive liquor and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He toured the house like an investor, commenting on art, architecture, and resale potential. He spoke about responsibility, about protection, about how overwhelming wealth could be for someone in my position. I just want to help, he said. This is complicated. I listened quietly. By the time he left, his concern had turned into strategy. The pattern became clear. They did not show up because they missed me. They showed up because something valuable had appeared. And for the first time, I understood the warning in the letter. This was not about family. This was about access. And I was about to learn how far they were willing to go to get it. The visits did not slow down after that. They multiplied. Calls started coming from numbers I did not recognize. Messages arrived with familiar names attached. People who had not spoken to me in years suddenly eager to reconnect. Each one followed the same pattern. Polite opening. Concerned tone. A reason to talk that had nothing to do with how I was actually doing. Pressure does not always arrive as force. Sometimes it arrives as persistence. My father called first. Not to check on me but to warn me. He spoke about legal exposure, about family disputes that could turn ugly if mishandled. He framed everything as advice. Every sentence coded in authority. You are not equipped to handle this alone, he said. You need guidance. What he meant was control. When I refused, the tone shifted. Subtle but unmistakable. He reminded me of how easily narratives could be shaped. How public perception mattered. How quickly support disappeared when people believed the wrong story. That call ended without resolution. The next came from a cousin I barely remembered. Friendly at first. Casual. He joked about family gatherings, about how strange life could be. Then he brought up the house. The location. The value. The condition. You know, he said lightly, these things tend to get messy. People contest wills all the time. It was not a threat. It was a suggestion. Texts followed. Emails. Invitations to meet. Each one asked for something small. Access. Information. Reassurance. I declined every time, keeping my responses brief, neutral, distant. That distance irritated them. The pressure escalated into impatience. Questions turned sharper. Curiosity turned accusatory. I was asked to explain myself, to justify why I deserved what I had been given. The same people who had disappeared during my collapse now demanded clarity. Outsiders joined in. Financial advisors I never contacted reached out, somehow aware of my situation. Attorneys offered consultations framed as protection. Even distant acquaintances sent messages disguised as congratulations, followed by suggestions about partnerships or investments. Everyone wanted proximity. No one wanted me. I started documenting everything. Calls. Messages. Dates. Times. Patterns. The house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a boundary line I was constantly defending. One evening, a distant relative showed up unannounced. He stood at the gate, smiling too easily, waving as if this was a surprise visit between friends. When I refused to let him in, his smile faded. You are making this harder than it needs to be, he said. That sentence stayed with me, because it revealed the truth underneath all of it. They believed resistance was temporary. They believed pressure would eventually work. They believed I would fold the way I always had. They were wrong. That night, as I locked the doors and checked every window, I realized something important. This was no longer about inheritance. It was about who controlled the outcome. And the harder they pushed, the clearer my role became. I was not here to negotiate. I was here to hold the line. And they had not yet seen how far I was willing to go to do that. The shift happened quietly, then all at once. One morning my phone would not stop vibrating. Notifications stacked on top of each other before I could open a single one. Missed calls. Emails marked urgent. Messages that all carried the same undertone of concern wrapped around curiosity. Someone had talked. The first article appeared online before noon. The headline used my name like bait, paired with words that suggested controversy without offering facts. Inheritance disputes. Family tension. Questions surrounding intent. The language was careful, but the implication was clear. I was being framed. By the afternoon there were more. Different outlets. Similar angles. Anonymous sources close to the family. Legal experts weighing in on situations they clearly did not understand. Each piece chipped away at my credibility, not aggressively but persistently. Public judgment rarely feels personal at first. Then it does. Comments followed quickly. Strangers dissected my character based on assumptions and half-truths. Some questioned my motives. Others questioned my past. A few suggested I had manipulated my way into something I did not deserve. I stopped reading after the third article. That evening the legal pressure arrived. A formal notice was delivered to the gate. Polite language. Precise wording. A request for documentation. Followed by a warning disguised as procedure. The estate, I was informed, could be contested. The terms could be challenged. My right to remain uncontested was not guaranteed. I called the attorney immediately. She was calm. Too calm. This was expected, she said. They are testing how you respond. How bad can it get? I asked. There was a pause. They will try to make you look unfit, she replied. Emotionally unstable, financially irresponsible, questionable in judgment. The words landed heavy. I had survived losing everything quietly. Now I was being asked to defend my right to rebuild in public. Cameras that once watched my humiliation were preparing to watch my reaction. The pressure was intentional. If I reacted emotionally, it would confirm their narrative. If I stayed silent, it would invite speculation. Every option carried risk. I walked through the house that night, the rooms darker than usual, the silence no longer neutral. This was the part no one warned me about. The moment when private endurance was no longer enough. Reputation, I realized, was the new battleground. And it was designed to exhaust me. As I stood in the library, phone buzzing again with another alert, I understood something critical. They were not trying to win in court yet. They were trying to weaken me first. And whatever move I made next would decide whether this story ended with my quiet disappearance, or with something far louder than they were prepared for. The call came late the next morning. Not urgent. Not panicked. Controlled. My attorney asked me to come in person. Her office was quiet in a way that felt intentional, tucked above street noise, insulated from urgency. When I arrived, she did not offer reassurance. She did not ask how I was holding up. Instead, she placed a locked metal case on the conference table between us. This was not supposed to come out yet, she said. But circumstances have accelerated. She slid a key across the table. Inside the case were folders. Dozens of them. Neatly labeled. Chronological. Names I recognized immediately. My father. My sister. Cousins. Even a few outsiders who had suddenly appeared in my life over the past weeks. I looked up at her, confused. The benefactor anticipated resistance, she said. Not just legally. Personally. She opened the first folder. Emails. Screenshots. Formal requests disguised as casual check-ins. Messages that, when placed together, revealed patterns I had felt but never fully articulated. Pressure. Entitlement. Manipulation layered beneath politeness. Then came the recordings. Phone calls archived with dates and timestamps. Conversations where voices shifted the moment they did not get what they wanted. Threats wrapped in concern. Ultimatums disguised as advice. I felt something cold settle into my chest. He documented everything, she continued. For years. She explained the strategy calmly. The estate had been structured with contingencies. If challenges arose, countermeasures activated automatically. Legal protections layered beneath public exposure safeguards. Evidence preserved in a way that met every admissibility standard. This was not reaction. This was preparation. He believed truth worked best when it was undeniable, she said. Not loud. Not emotional. Precise. I thought about the letter. The warnings. The emphasis on silence. On restraint. On boundaries. None of it had been symbolic. It had been tactical. These materials do not need to be used, she said. Unless they push further. I understood immediately. This was leverage, not revenge. A reminder that every move made against me had been recorded, categorized, and preserved. That every attempt to undermine my credibility carried consequences they had not considered. The advantage was not just legal. It was psychological. They believed I was isolated. They believed I was unprotected. They believed I would fold under scrutiny. They were wrong on all counts. As I closed the final folder, something shifted. For weeks I had been reacting, defending, enduring. Now I saw the full board for the first time. I did not need to explain myself. I did not need to rush. I did not need to expose anything yet. I had something far more powerful. Time. And a strategy that had been waiting patiently for them to make the next mistake. The shift did not come with anger. Came with clarity. I stood alone in the study that night, folders spread neatly across the desk, city lights blinking through the tall windows like distant witnesses. For weeks I had been bracing myself, waiting for the next call, the next article, the next threat disguised as concern. That waiting stopped. I realized I had been reacting to a version of the story they wanted me trapped inside. Quiet. Defensive. Apologetic without apology. I had mistaken silence for safety again, and this time I saw it clearly. Silence only works when it is chosen. Mine had been imposed. I read through the evidence once more, not with shock this time but with focus. The patterns were undeniable. The same people who questioned my stability were the ones applying pressure. The same voices warning me about risk were the ones creating it. They were not stronger than me. They were louder. And loud only works when no one is listening closely. I called my attorney and spoke without hesitation. I told her I was done shrinking, done absorbing impact quietly while my name was rewritten by people who had already proven their intentions. I am ready, I said. But I want this done cleanly. She did not ask what I meant. We discussed timing, sequence, control. Not retaliation but exposure. Not emotion but facts. The strategy was simple and precise. Let them continue. Let them escalate. Every move they made only strengthened the record already being built. For the first time since the divorce, I slept through the night. The decision settled into my body like relief. Not because the fight would be easy, but because I was no longer avoiding it. I stopped checking comments. I stopped answering messages that carried hidden demands. I stopped explaining myself to people who had already chosen a side. I chose intention instead. The next morning, I walked through the house differently. Shoulders back. Steps measured. The space no longer felt intimidating. It felt anchored. Like a place designed to hold ground, not test it. I understood then what the benefactor had truly given me. Not money. Not shelter. Perspective. They expected panic. They expected mistakes. They expected me to crumble under attention. What they were about to get was something far more dangerous. A woman who understood the rules of the game, and who had finally decided to play it on her own terms. The room filled faster than I expected. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters whispered to each other, phones already lifted, ready to record every breath, every blink. I walked in beside my attorney and took my seat without looking around. The table felt solid beneath my hands. Grounded. Real. This was no longer about defending myself. This was about ending a narrative. When the session began, the accusations came first. Carefully phrased. Strategically vague. Claims of undue influence. Questions about my emotional stability. Suggestions that I had taken advantage of someone who could no longer speak for himself. I listened without interruption. That was the first shift. They expected reaction. They expected visible discomfort. They expected cracks. What they got instead was stillness. The kind that makes noise feel unnecessary. When it was our turn, my attorney stood calmly and opened a single folder. Not all of them. Just one. She spoke clearly, without emphasis, without drama. She presented timelines. Correspondence. Records that aligned too cleanly to dismiss. Messages sent before the inheritance was finalized. Requests made and denied. Pressure applied long before anyone claimed concern. The room quieted. Then came the recordings. Short excerpts. Verified. Time-stamped. Voices familiar to everyone present. Words spoken with confidence when no one believed they would be heard outside private spaces. The contrast between public statements and private intent became impossible to ignore. Faces changed. Power does not leave loudly. It drains. I was asked to speak next. I stood without rushing. I did not raise my voice. I did not justify my existence. I did not explain my pain. I stated facts. I described patterns. I clarified what had happened and what had not, without attaching emotion to either. I did not ask for this, I said evenly. I did not manipulate anyone. I did not take advantage of grief or distance. I was chosen. That word landed differently in the room. I stayed silent because I was advised to, I continued. Not because I was afraid. Silence was strategy. This is clarity. I sat down before anyone could interrupt. Questions followed, but they lacked edge now. The certainty that fueled them had thinned. Accusations softened into clarifications. Pressure shifted direction. The narrative was changing. By the time the session ended, no verdict had been announced. No dramatic resolution offered. That was intentional. The real result was already visible. The story they built could no longer stand on its own. Outside, cameras surged forward, voices overlapping, questions shouted without order. I paused at the doorway and turned back once, not toward them but toward the room I had just left. I felt calm. Not victorious. Not relieved. Centered. This confrontation was not the end. It was the moment everything tilted. And as I walked past the cameras without comment, I knew something they did not yet understand. The truth had finally entered the conversation. And it was not finished speaking. The truth that reframes everything. The call came 3 days later. Not from the court. Not from the media. From my attorney. Her voice was steady. But there was a pause at the start that told me this was not procedural. This was personal. There is one more document, she said. It was sealed separately from the rest of the estate. You were not meant to receive it until after the confrontation. That alone made my chest tighten. We met in her office again, the same room, the same table. This time there was no metal case. Just a single envelope resting between us. Cream-colored paper. Handwritten name. My name. The handwriting matched the letter I had already read. I did not open it right away. You should know, she said carefully. This changes how you understand the inheritance. And your family. I looked up. How? She exhaled slowly. The benefactor was not just watching your life. He was protecting it. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and an old photograph. The photograph stopped me cold. A younger woman stood in a garden, smiling mid-laugh, sunlight caught in her hair. I recognized that smile instantly. I had seen it in the mirror my entire life. It was my mother. I turned the photo over. A date. A name. His name. The room felt unsteady. The letter answered what my mind could not yet form into words. He wrote about a relationship kept quiet. About a choice made to avoid scandal, to protect reputations that were never willing to protect him in return. About watching from a distance because proximity would have caused damage he refused to inflict. I was never allowed to claim you, the letter said. But I never stopped being responsible for you. The truth landed slowly, then all at once. He was not a distant relative. He was my biological father. My breath caught, sharp and shallow. Memories rearranged themselves instantly. The emotional distance in my childhood. The tension I never understood. The way my father, no, the man who raised me, had always kept a careful space between us. My attorney spoke gently. Your family has always known. That sentence hurt more than the revelation itself. They knew. They let me grow up believing I was the problem. They watched me bend, adjust, and disappear into relationships that mirrored the same conditional acceptance. The inheritance was not revenge. It was recognition. Tears came quietly without urgency. Not grief. Not anger. Clarity. For the first time my entire story made sense. And I understood why the test had never been about money. It had been about truth. And whether I was strong enough to stand inside it once it finally arrived. Growth, boundaries, and success without spectacle. Revenge did not arrive the way stories promise it will. There were no confrontations in parking lots. No raised voices. No public celebrations. What followed was quieter, slower, and far more permanent. I stopped explaining myself. That alone changed everything. When the court filings were withdrawn and the articles lost momentum, I did not issue statements. I did not offer interviews. I let silence do what it does best when it is chosen deliberately. People noticed. The mansion stopped feeling like a fortress and started feeling like a foundation. I learned its rhythm. Mornings filled with light through the tall windows. Evenings settled into calm instead of tension. I worked at the desk where the first letter had waited, turning intention into structure. Boundaries became my new language. I returned calls selectively. I declined meetings that arrived with hidden agendas. I trusted my instincts without apologizing for them. The same people who once spoke over me now hesitated, uncertain of where they stood. That uncertainty was earned. Success followed quietly. I did not rush into extravagance. I studied. I learned. I listened. Advisors were vetted carefully. Opportunities evaluated without urgency. I chose patience over reaction, clarity over approval. Every decision reinforced something I had never been taught before. I was allowed to take up space. The family stopped trying to regain control when it became clear there was nothing left to negotiate. Invitations ceased. Messages went unanswered. Distance replaced entitlement, and I let it. There was no satisfaction in watching them retreat. Only relief. The quiet revenge was not watching others lose. It was realizing I had already won by refusing to repeat old patterns. I rebuilt myself around principles instead of permission. Safety came from boundaries, not proximity. Love came from consistency, not endurance. Stability came from self-trust, not appearances. The world adjusted. Opportunities came without demands. Respect arrived without explanation. I was no longer the woman people spoke for. I was the one making decisions that did not require approval. That kind of growth does not announce itself. It simply lasts. And as the 6-month mark approached, I realized the inheritance had already done its job. The house had not changed me. The money had not saved me. The challenge had revealed me. Quiet revenge is not about proving someone wrong. It is about becoming unreachable by the harm that once defined you. And that is the kind of success no one can take back. Former husband or key betrayer returns, power imbalance reversed. The knock came late in the afternoon. Not loud, not urgent, polite. I almost ignored it. The house had taught me that unexpected visits rarely carried good intentions. Still, something about the timing felt deliberate, like the past testing whether it still had access. When I opened the door, I recognized him instantly. He looked smaller. Not physically but energetically. The confidence he once wore so easily now sat awkwardly on his frame. His suit was well-fitted but tired, like it had been worn to too many meetings that ended badly. The man who once watched me leave with nothing now stood uncertain on the other side of the threshold. "Sophia," he said, attempting a smile that did not land. "You look well." I did not step aside. "What do you want?" I asked calmly. That question alone shifted the balance. He hesitated, eyes flicking past me into the house, taking in what he could see from the doorway. Marble floors. Stillness. Control. The same control he once assumed would always belong to him. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "For everything." The words sounded rehearsed. I waited. He talked about mistakes. About pressure. About how things had gotten out of hand. He spoke as if the divorce had been an accident, not a calculated removal. As if humiliation had been collateral damage, not strategy. "I never meant for it to go that far," he added. I believed that he believed it. That did not make it true. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable with my silence. Then came the real reason. "I am struggling," he admitted. "Business has not been great. Things changed after everything. I thought maybe we could talk. Clear the air." Clear the air. The same man who once froze my access to money now wanted conversation. The same man who replaced me publicly now stood asking for private understanding. I studied him without judgment. "I am not angry," I said finally. "But I am also not available." His expression flickered. Surprise first. Then confusion. "I am not the person you left behind," I continued. "And I am not interested in revisiting a version of myself that needed your approval." He nodded slowly, as if absorbing something too late. "I wish you well," I said, stepping back. "But this ends here." I closed the door gently. No satisfaction followed. No triumph. Just finality. That was when I understood the past only knocks when it senses a door might still be open. Mine was not. The real work started after the noise faded. Not immediately. Not dramatically. It began quietly, in the hours when the house was still and no one was watching. I spent those mornings at the long desk near the window, reviewing plans instead of defending myself, thinking about impact instead of perception. I did not want to build something impressive. I wanted to build something untouchable. Money alone does not do that. Structures do. I started with intention. Clear rules. Clear values. No urgency. I met with advisors who listened more than they spoke. I asked questions that revealed character, not credentials. Anyone who rushed me did not make the cut. The first venture was modest by design. A firm focused on backing women-led businesses that had been overlooked, dismissed, or quietly pushed aside. Not charity. Partnership. Capital paired with autonomy. Support without strings disguised as favors. Word spread without marketing. Founders came prepared. Confident. Careful. Women who had learned the cost of dependency and were done paying it. I recognized that look immediately. I had worn it myself. The work felt grounding. Decisions were made without panic. Growth happened without spectacle. Every agreement was transparent. Every boundary respected. The absence of chaos became the standard. I also established a foundation. Legal support for women leaving controlling relationships. Temporary housing without judgment. Financial education that did not talk down or rush recovery. No publicity campaigns. No savior language. Just access and dignity. That mattered more than numbers. What surprised me most was how little resistance followed. People who once questioned my worth now kept their distance. Not because I demanded it, but because they no longer recognized a way in. The work spoke clearly enough on its own. This success did not announce itself. It settled. It created stability that did not depend on approval, validation, or proximity to power. It stood on systems, not personalities. That was the difference. For the first time in my life, what I built could not be frozen, contested, or taken. Because it was not designed to impress. It was designed to last. And that made all the difference. The lesson did not arrive when I inherited money. It arrived when I lost everything else. That is where the truth lives. Not in abundance but in absence. When the titles disappear. When the safety you trusted dissolves. When the people you believed would stay choose distance instead. That is when you find out what was real. I learned that self-worth cannot be borrowed. It cannot be secured through relationships, appearances, or proximity to power. The moment it depends on someone else's approval, it becomes fragile. Resilience is not loud. It does not announce itself with strength or confidence. It looks like getting up when no one is watching. It looks like learning quietly. It looks like choosing boundaries even when they cost you access. Real power is not control. It is choice. It is the ability to say no without explaining yourself. It is the discipline to stay calm when provoked. It is the patience to let truth surface on its own timeline instead of forcing it. I believed for a long time that safety came from being chosen. I was wrong. Safety comes from choosing yourself before you are forced to. The people who tried to break me were not stronger. They were simply louder for longer. When the noise stopped, all that remained was who I had become without their permission. That version of me did not need revenge. She did not need validation. She did not need to be believed immediately. She only needed to remain consistent. Because consistency builds credibility. Credibility builds freedom. And freedom is the one thing no one can take once you stop handing it away. That is the moral. You do not rise by proving others wrong. You rise by becoming unreachable to the harm that once defined you. And once you understand that, nothing about power looks the same again. Sometimes I think about the woman who walked down those stone steps with 2 suitcases and no plan. The one who believed losing everything meant she had failed at life. I wish I could tell her that this was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of a version of herself she had never been allowed to meet. Everything that followed looked like loss on the surface. But underneath it was alignment. The stripping away of roles, labels, and expectations that never protected me in the first place. What remained was something honest. Something solid. I did not win by becoming louder. I did not win by destroying anyone. I won by refusing to disappear. If you are watching this and standing in a moment where your life feels like it is falling apart, I want you to hear this clearly. Sometimes collapse is not punishment. Sometimes it is release. Here is my question for you. If you lost everything tomorrow, status, comfort, approval, who would you become once there was nothing left to prove? And would you choose yourself faster than I did? Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. And if this story resonated with you, share the part that stayed with you the most.